Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Stocking Stuffers, Halloween Candy, and Sighting the Moon, a conversation on holidays, belonging, and parenting Muslim children. I'm Mahnur Fahim with the Family and Youth Institute, or the FYI for short. The FYI is a non-profit providing research-backed resources for our communities to reduce stigma, start conversations, and give our community the tools they need to thrive and be well. Every year, right around Halloween and until after Christmas, the same conversation pops up in our Muslim communities. Should my child go trick-or-treating? Can we make gingerbread houses? Is it okay to celebrate mainstream holidays? Parents are thinking about whether their children will feel left out, and maybe whether this whole thing is really that big of a deal. A lot of parents are concerned with making the right decision to set the tone for their kids at a young age. So, as the holiday season approaches, and I'm sure that you all can already hear the jingle bells, we wanted to dig into this topic a bit more. What's the big deal with holiday celebrations anyways? How is it different if you have young kids versus teenagers? What should parents keep in mind as they navigate these decisions during the holiday season? To help me answer these questions, I have two special guests today. The first is Duaa Haggag, a community educator here at the FYI. She works in private practice as a child, adolescent, and family therapist at Silent Sunlight Counseling. Duaa is also the writer behind one of our most popular projects, the Meaning Through Movie series. Check it out if you haven't already. We also have with us Dr. Madiha Tahseen, research fellow, community educator, and research translation manager here at the FYI. She has a PhD in applied developmental psychology and will be bringing that perspective as well as her research on Muslim youth and identity into our conversation today. Lastly, before we get started, I just wanted to add that our conversation today mostly speaks to the immigrant or child of immigrant experience. Because of the backgrounds of those of us having this discussion, our experiences may not apply in the same way to the Black Muslim or convert experience. For more on navigating the holidays with non-Muslim family members, or as someone who used to celebrate in the past, stay tuned for a part 2 to this conversation. Okay, just want to add that, so let's get started. So we all probably know there are different ways that families approach holiday celebrations. Some parents allow their kids to participate at a young age, but not when they're older. Other parents feel that the holidays are an extension of American culture and not religion, and don't see a problem with letting their kids participate. And then there are families who very early on want their children to be comfortable asserting their Muslim identity and choose not to participate. So Duaa and Madiha, let's dive into this. What are your thoughts?
So as human beings, we are tribal creatures. And when I say tribal creatures, part of our self-worth, part of our of how we feel about ourselves is related to our belongingness, is related to us feeling like we're part of a group. And that support system and that belongingness helps us to have to grow in ways that are positive and healthy. And so traditions plays a really big part of that. When we create traditions or family traditions, and a lot of it has to do with our holidays, it helps a young person feel and have the memories that they belong to something larger, right? They're not just living on this earth by themselves. And that's why there's so much emphasis on the idea of holidays, because for many people, when they think of holidays, they have certain memories that they can go back to and they can rely on. And even when we talk about associations with the faith or the deen, much of what we associate with the faith has to do with the relationships that we have and the traditions that we've had in the past. So if we can, for a lot of people, if they've had negative experiences with regards to traditions or relationships, then perhaps their point of view or their perspective will be very different from someone who had positive, warm, relationships or experiences. So I think that the reason why it's so important for us to talk about holiday traditions in the context of belongingness is it really plays a big role on a child and young person's self-worth, and how we play it and how we approach it will help our young people become more confident. So I think in the larger context of things, I don't really want to focus on the holiday per se, but more about how do we as parents, guardians, mentors, really build that sense of identity in our children. And it's a lot of pressure around us. And I think as parents, we feel that pressure and we notice that pressure. And as a minority in this country, we want to be able to have that pride in the mainstream American culture, but also be true to our Muslim identity, right? And I think that's kind of where that finding that balance is really important. And I think for many of us, we wonder in our heads, we think, how far can I push this identity piece so that it's not too, stifling and isolating for my kid, but also, where do I draw the line? What's okay for my child to participate in? I think that's kind of that balance, figuring out that balance is what I'd like to focus on and what, maybe we can address.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was saying, is that for all of us to recognize it's that sense of, it's a human need, right? So it's not just like, oh, it's just holidays, who cares? It's not a big deal. It's that what we're looking for through those holidays is that sense of belonging. And I just wanted for people to kind of recognize that it's a human need that was there even at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Like that initial gut reaction to the message he was bringing, a part of it was because, that's what the people at that time were like, well, this is what we belong to. This is who I identify with. These are the values I hold. You're telling me to shake that up and now consider something new. And so it's that same struggle that those of us that are here in the States are even if we're, second generation, third generation, are going through that same, I don't want to say clash, because I don't want to support that narrative that there's such a big distinction. But just that, where do we belong? Where do we fit in? Mm-hmm. And so just all of us just centering that and keeping that in mind is that the heart of it is that belongingness, that question of who am I and what group do I belong to? Who's like me?
Yeah. And I think that's important because we're not scholars of the faith. So we're not really right. necessarily talking about whether or not celebrating these holidays are halal or haram, but mostly what does it do from a mental health, psychosocial perspective to our families and to our children.
Yes, thank you, Duaa, for that reminder. Definitely, you are not going to hear halal or haram in this conversation.
So, keeping some of these ideas in mind, at what age do children experience identity and even become aware that they are juggling multiple identities, such as being both Muslim and American?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to the research side of things, and Duaa, if you want to jump in from your sort of clinical experience, but as a developmental, psychologist, we know that sort of when you're younger, everyone has identity, right? It's just a matter of your personal individual identity, which is how do I see myself, and then that kind of changes as you age. So when you're younger, your focus is on that personal identity, and the kind of question you're thinking about sort of subconsciously is, am I loved? Who is my safe space? Who can I rely on? Who's there who's in my corner? And so you're so closely tied to the attachments and the relationships you have, like your family, is the core. That's what you're really going through at a younger age. You do become aware of cultural differences, things like that as you age. But that question of who am I as I'm thinking about my family really shifts outward a lot more when you enter your adolescent years. So then the question is still who am I, but it's more, where do I belong? And who am I in relation to these other groups that now you're much more aware of? So your peer groups, the different cultural groups, identity groups, whatever, across whatever line that you're thinking of, whether it's culture, religion, race, right? All of those become much more apparent to you, and you start thinking about, okay, this is what I established about myself when I was younger as a little kid, and now I can separate myself in terms of my values, my belief systems, and how do those now align with what's around me. And that really becomes prominent in your adolescent years. And so that's where that sense of belonging beyond your family comes into play a lot more.
I think building on what you were saying, Madiha, at that young age, it's all about the safety, right? It's all about the trust. So I think sometimes people feel like I have to expose my young kids to a whole repertoire of things because they have to choose, right? But if we look developmentally, that's something that's going to happen at a later stage, and it's not necessarily something that we need to 100% provide for our kids when they're younger. When they're younger, it's more about making sure they feel safe. Like you said, someone's in their corner, so they're feeling loved, right? So if we approach this topic from that developmental perspective, we can see how we can maneuver and deal with kids based on where they are developmentally. At the adolescent stage, it's more about what part or what traditions or what part of my culture do I want to keep? And what part of it do I feel like, no, I want to let go. I want to kind of explore other options. And so I think this is really important, especially when it comes to like holidays and traditions, when we think of that in terms of what can we, what is important for us to make sure we provide for our younger kids versus maybe teenagers or adolescents.
Yeah. And I wanted to add to that is, this is where a lot of times when you have teens, you're like, oh my God, why are they pushing back so much? Why are they questioning? And it feels like as a parent, it's like about, what we label as like rebellious or like, but it's not. It's just now because of other changes that have happened to them cognitively, they can start to question a lot more, right? And not question to be rebellious, but question to understand. And to answer that question that Duaa mentioned of what do I want to keep and what do I kind of want to let go of, or what do I want to explore more? They can also dig into a lot more now of, is this culture or is this religion, right? This, tradition or this religious practice, whatever. Is it really religion or is it like culture? They can start to like make those distinctions now. And so they'll start to push back, but again, to understand and to then internalize that and say, I believe this because it makes sense to me, not just because somebody told me to. And so part of it is parents, like, we need to reframe it and say, this is not rebellion. This is an attempt to understand. And that helps them think of strategies too, which we'll get to.
And also at that age, I think they'll be more confident in that exploration if you've established in those first years that sense of trust and love. And this is really important when it comes to like things like holiday traditions, right? If I've established when my kids were younger, open communication, the trust, the love, that type of thing, then when they're at that stage of exploration, and we let go a little bit, they'll figure things out, but then they know that they have us to fall back on. They can come back to us and ask us those really important questions. And sometimes some of the things that they think they might have wanted to do in terms of holiday traditions or whatever, if we've established that love and trust at the very beginning, they might kind of just dabble in it a little bit or tap into it a little bit, and then they realize that it's not me. This is not what I really want to do, right? So I think that that initial stage of establishing that really strong home base allows the teenagers to be able to explore in a way that's healthy and not so risky, I guess you could say that.
Yeah, so they need that foundation, right?
Yeah.
Like you're saying, to lean on and come back to.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of like, even though, we started this kind of part of our conversation saying that the question of like belonging really gets, magnified in teen years. As a parent, that's not the time to address that question. You have to build a foundation when they're young, right? You can't come into teen years and then try to build their love of, our religious traditions or our sense of belonging to our community and our beliefs when you haven't done that when they're little. So you have to build a foundation so that they can come back to that, and then you also can follow up with that and work on it in their teen years as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if you didn't make a big splash about traditions when they were little, it's going to be much harder to do that when now they're telling you they want to go do XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so even as a college student, holidays still play a really big role in how you socialize, whether it's through parties or outings or whatnot. But I've had these conversations with my parents when I was younger, and even now I lean onto those conversations to make decisions about what to do or what not to do and what my boundaries are in these situations. So I agree, setting that foundation from a young age can be really helpful, and I know it's been really helpful for me. But let's dive a bit deeper into this. For parents, at the end of the day, it comes down to making a decision. Do they opt into the celebrations or do they opt out? And how do either of those choices impact their kids, whether it's celebrating or not celebrating?
So I think as parents, it's kind of like it's a big experiment. Parenting is a big experiment. There's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of variables. So you have the personalities of your children, you have the specific environment that your kids go to school, their neighborhoods. What is your masjid or Islamic community environment like? There's so many factors, and I think it's really hard to give like a very rigid answer. But if we go back to this developmental idea that young people are looking, at least at the first stages, they're looking for that sense of belonging in terms of love, right? That should be the key, or how we tint the conversations or the decisions that we make when we deal with our kids. So let's talk about some of these, holidays that, that is often controversial. So we talk about like Halloween or maybe Christmas, not so much, but even during Christmas time. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what is it that our kids want out of this experience? What is it that they want? Do they want to feel like they're a part of their classroom, activity? Do they want to feel like a connection with the people around them? What is it that they want out of the experience? And it's very different as a young child compared to a teenager, right? What they want, what they're looking for. I found that with younger kids, it's kind of like, if I can give them something that will fulfill that need outside of the hullabaloo of whatever that holiday is, that usually does it for them, right? If I can keep that out of sight, out of mind, right? And I'll give you a specific example. So when my kids were younger, like around Halloween time, we would have a family camping trip every time it was the weekend of Halloween. And we would go on a trip. We would go up, up north. We say up north in Michigan. We would go up north, and, just that entire weekend, we would go camping. And it was like all that stuff that was happening in Halloween, we would come back after it was all over. And that's it. It was done, And, of course, I'm not saying that we completely shielded them from the Halloween because it's everywhere around them, but the really big party, trick-or-treating event type of things, it was something that they didn't really experience. And we had conversations about it, and I never really talked about it from a halal or haram perspective, to be honest. It was more like, this is not really a really big part of our tradition, and we'll later on we can talk about it, or later on we can deal with it later. So when my kids got older, it no longer really became something that was such a big deal. But at that age where they wanted to explore what that was, and they said, "Oh, Mama, there's some kind of a bowling event that was Halloween theme," I let them go. I said, "Okay, just explore, go see what it was." And they saw it, and it wasn't a big deal, and it was over, right? And I think at the later stage, I didn't stop them from going because I knew that it was something of an exploratory nature. But at the earlier stage, I was focused more on building those connections and providing for them those alternatives that would give them that sense of belongingness and love. And I think that goes for any of these traditions and any of these, holidays that we find around us. And another big question to ask is, if we do involve our kids in the mainstream holidays and traditions, how are our Muslim traditions in comparison? Like, if we are letting our kids engage in all of these, mainstream, holidays, but our Eid and Ramadan activities is, mediocre in comparison, then that is a memory that your kids will not forget. That will be ingrained in their minds, that these mainstream holidays and traditions is a lot more fun and a lot more engaging. And I feel like I belong. There's good feelings with regards to that compared to our Muslim traditions.
One other question I'll add, and this is what we're great at, right? Psychologists and clinicians, we like to answer questions with questions. Is also, as a parent, think about like, what am I worried about, right? Am I worried that my kid is going to be left out? And, you know, as parents, and I'm not going to give the answer to this, because I think you have to keep all those different things in mind that Duaa said to be able to answer that question. You know, it depends. Are you in a place geographically? Where are you? Maybe you're in a very isolated community. So, and your child's personality is different and the school is different. So you have to keep all that in mind. But, you know, most of us as parents are worried about your kid being left out, and your kid feeling weird or different or strange, and, you know, kind of being picked on for that. And I would just encourage us to think about, is that so bad? You know, again, I know there's different things you have to keep in mind for sure, but sometimes we're not always supposed to be like everybody else, right? And in kind of feeling a little different, it gives you a stronger sense of resilience too, and also makes your identity a little bit stronger too, in that, like, this is what we believe, and this is what we do. And of course, when you build all the foundation, you know, and all of the other Islamic traditions, like Duaa said, you have to do all that too, of course. But when you've done all that and your child still feels this struggle a little bit of, okay, why can't I be like everybody else? That, like, struggle can make your child a little bit more resilient as well. You know, we didn't, like, Islam, and again, not going into halal or haram or any of that, but, you know, as Muslims, like, the whole concept of being strangers, right? And we're not necessarily supposed to assimilate into everything. That's what makes you stronger and resilient. So that just something to think about as a parent is, if I'm worried about my child being left out, you know, how can I navigate that? And is that so bad? And is that going to impact my kid? So those would be other things I would think about too as a parent.
I think you make an excellent point, Madiha, because a very big part of parenting is introspection. A lot of times what we do with our children, it has a very big relation with our history.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe we need to ask ourselves the question, like, when you were a kid, how did you feel during those holiday traditions? Are you trying to make up for certain things that maybe you didn't get when you were a kid? Or you're trying to make a point? Or what is it? Like, and I think that's really important for us to really be introspective and ask those personal questions.
I wanted to dig into that just a little bit, because I do think, especially as those of us become, you know, those of us who were first generation or second generation become parents, what does that mean, right? Is it often, you know, is it that sometimes we want to do something not because we think our kids are going to be left out, but because we think we're going to be left out or we're going to be labeled, especially in this day and age of narratives and cancel culture and, you know, all of that stuff. And so we have this fear of being labeled a certain way in our peer group.
A lot of times it has nothing to do with whether or not the kids want it, but whether or not the parents feel okay with, you know, one parent feels like, I should put my kids in costume and go trick-or-treating, and how dare you, you know, make me feel bad about doing that, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and another parent will be like, oh, you know, that's not something that we do, and maybe they'll be labeled as backward or, you know, traditional, and, you know, why are you conservative? Why are you not adopting, you know, the mainstream culture, all that stuff. So, like, I know that it's hard to do, but we do have to take time in sitting with ourselves, and just like we are asking you to do, you know, to do as parents, and asking our kids, why do you want to do this? We have to ask ourselves that question: is why is it important for your family to engage in this holiday? You know, where is this coming from? And I think if we're able to consciously, you know, do that and be intentional about, you know, how we approach these holidays, what we do afterwards is going to be a lot more clear. It's going to have a lot more focus. It's going to have a lot more intention in terms of what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think for a parent, it's really important to take the time to do that, so that the decisions you're making are driven by the best interest of your child, and not sort of your own unmet needs or things that you need to, like, heal from, which is natural. It's going to happen, right? We're all humans. But oftentimes we think we're making a decision because it's in the best interest of our child. It's what we think we want to do for them, but it's really driven by something else, a little bit more subconscious and more tied to our own, sort of histories or unmet needs or desires. And so I think to be true to our kids, we really we owe it to them, and we owe it to ourselves to give ourselves time and space for that introspection.
I also think that as parents, we have to learn to be masters of pivoting.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, if we decide to do something, or we think that something is okay 1 year, and we try it. Remember, we said parenting is a big trial and error experiment. So if we try it and we're like, that was a bad idea, it's okay the next year to say, we're not going to do that anymore.
Right.
And it's okay to even bring that up with your family. Like, yeah, I thought it would be a good idea to do XYZ, and we tried it, and I realized after reading and experiencing it that it probably, it's probably better that we don't do that anymore. Right? Or the other way around. We don't do something, and we think about it a little bit, and we feel like, okay, well, maybe it's all right this year because my kids are older, or because, I have a different perspective on things, that this year we're going to do it. Right. And that when you model that for your children understand that, not everything is black and white. And it's okay to learn from your experience and to pivot. We're teaching our kids to pivot and that it's okay to have that growth experience or that growth mindset. So, and I, even as parents and adults, sometimes we worry, like, what are other adults going to think of us? Like, last year we didn't celebrate and now we are, or, last year we celebrated and now we're not. Like, what are people going to say? What am I going to say? Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that shouldn't be the forefront of what we're thinking. Again, we go back to our families in terms of what's healthy, what's good for our own families, what's going to work for our own families. And that's okay. Yeah. And I think our kids appreciate that, right? Like, they appreciate that. And they're smart enough to ask those questions. Like, we didn't celebrate Halloween last year, Mama. How come this year you're letting me go to this party or whatever? Like, what the example that you gave, Medea, earlier. And for us to say, well, I thought about it and you're older now, and I want that to be a decision that you make, not a decision I make for you. And giving that ownership to our kids to, we're shifting from making the decisions for our family to allowing them to make those decisions. And that's okay.
And allowing them to make mistakes within, of course, limits, but then learn from those mistakes.
Yeah.
Like, mistakes are a growth opportunity. They're not just, we're not trying to protect our kids from every single, and think we're just going to keep them in this bubble. So they're going to happen. So are you just going to provide them the grounds to learn from those mistakes?
Yeah. Yeah. And to provide for them that safety net. So, like, if they're going to go to this event or activity or whatever celebration, that you have some kind of a mechanism where, if they are in a situation where they realize midway that this was a really bad idea, that they can be like, Mom, I need you, without any judgment, without any, like, I told you so. Yeah. Where they're like, Mom, I need you to come and pick me up right now. And that has happened in my family before. I need you to come and pick me up right now. And it's like, okay, I'm there, right? And then they know there doesn't need to be, I told you so.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I think sometimes we don't realize the impact of having a back and forth discussion about a topic like this. Just focusing on permissibility doesn't allow us to explore how it impacts us on a deeper level. So you both mentioned having these conversations as a family and coming to these decisions through open conversations with your kids. What should parents keep in mind as they try to have these conversations? Medea, I know you have done some research that might be helpful here. Do you mind sharing a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so in some of the research that we've done with Muslim American adolescents, primarily South Asian and Arabs, second generation, we looked at like that constant question that all of us always talk about of like this supposed clash between like Muslim and American identities, and how do they balance them? Can they even balance them? Which identity do they care about? All of that. And so in that, and then how do parents support teens through that? And what we found, one was that Muslim youth actually value both their Muslim and American identities, and the youth that felt connected to both of their Muslim and American identities had the best like outcomes. They had the highest well-being and the lowest rates of depression and anxiety. So they were doing the best overall. Granted, we didn't look at cultural identity because we just weren't able to get to that. So that's definitely an open question. And then we looked at like, what were their parents doing to support them? And we found that those same youth who really had a strong balance of like their Muslim and American identities had parents who would spend time having healthy conversations, so healthy, supportive conversations with them about their identities. So when these same youth were struggling with, had questions about different aspects of being Muslim or different aspects of being American, their parents were willing to engage in that open conversation with them instead of just viewing it as like rebellious or you're scoffing at our religion or your tradition or whatever. So parents were more willing to hear them out, talk to them about it, support them in their exploration a little bit, kind of like what Duaa was saying before, where they go off a little bit and then they come back because they have that foundation. So parents who did that had teenagers who then also internalized what it really means to be Muslim and what it really means to have that American identity. And so I think part of answering going back to like your original question, Mahnoud, of what parents need to keep in mind when they're having these conversations, especially with their older kids, not necessarily young as much, that's a different approach, but with their teens, is really trying to understand, what is your teen truly talking to you about? What's the core of the issue that they're talking to you about? And watching your own reaction. The more that you have a really sort of, averse reaction to their conversations with you, the more they're going to shut down and not have that space to come and talk to you about their questions and their concerns. So in general, you want to be able to have those open, supportive conversations where you're welcoming that like back and forth a little bit, instead of just saying, we don't do this, Muslims don't do this, and that's it. That's all you need to know, right? We cannot have that approach. So I'll stop there, Duaa, and let you.
I think you said, mashallah, almost everything. Mashallah, pretty good. I honestly, this proverb of teach a man to fish instead of fish for them, right, and give them the fish, right? I don't know the exact proverb, but you guys probably understand what I'm saying. Is that as parents, we have to give our kids the tools, and in terms of, how do you figure out what it is that you want to do and what you want to believe in, especially as they grow older, instead of, like Madiha mentioned earlier, just telling them, just dictating to them, what is it that they need to believe? They need to have some kind of a conviction for what they're doing, and we can't make it for them, right? Again, there's very different, the shift is when they're younger, we're just providing them those loving environments and making sure that those loving environments helps them understand that those Muslim traditions are really important. But as they grow older, they have to make that, and we kind of played it a little bit when they're younger, because we've kind of pumped up the Muslim traditions when they're younger and have all those really positive associations, that they already have that baseline when they start exploring. And that's great for us because they'll remember what those positive Muslim traditions were like. But when we open the door, we give them the tools to explore, right? So let's what documentaries or what books or what things are out there that talk about the relationship of some of these holidays with certain religious traditions or certain pagan traditions or certain whatever it is, right? Like we give them the tools to discover those things. We give them the tools to discover, how it's played out in the American culture, in the mainstream American culture. So I think that's And what also comes to mind is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, al-hikmah dallatul mu'min. In our tradition, we think of ourselves as strangers, but also in our tradition, we think of hikmah or wisdom as the lost property of the believer, right? Wherever it is, wherever wisdom is, we have to follow it. So if there's certain aspects of these traditions that are beautiful and beneficial, let's look into it. Let's see how we can adopt it. During Christmas time, the lights are beautiful, right? And sometimes my daughters and I, we will just go for a drive and go look at the lights. It's not necessary. We're not necessarily celebrating Christmas, but I can acknowledge as a parent that the lights are pretty and they're enjoyable and they're fun to watch, right? And if my teenage daughter says, hey, I think we should hang up lights for Ramadan, that would be okay. That would be okay. So I think we have to be flexible in the way that we approach these things and give the kids those tools to be able to make those decisions on their own.
So that's exactly on point. I was thinking the lights question exactly as you were talking. I was like, well, we're on
the same wavelength, yeah.
So just to play devil's advocate, so that parents have, some, perhaps like sample conversations to pull from our conversation today. So if let's say I have a teen and your teen comes to you and says, well, I'm just gonna go hang out with my friends and get candy. What's wrong with that? Like for Halloween, right? Like why can't we just go get some candy from the mall? Or if your your teenager comes to you and says, why can't I just go do like, my friend's house, they're having gingerbread or whatever. I don't know. Teens probably don't do that these days. But like, if they come to you and say, why can't I do this? What's the big deal? As a parent, do you have like suggestions on how you might navigate that conversation?
Yeah. So I think it would depend on how I've been dealing with it when they were younger. I know that sounds like a very complicated answer, but if I've already established with my kids that it's not that big of a deal and I've downplayed those traditions, then I can approach my teen and say, why do you want to go? Like, what's happening? Like, it's not something that they do every year. Like, if I've already established when they were younger that every Halloween they go do candy, or every Christmas they do gingerbread houses, or whatever it is, right? Then it would be weird if I just came up to them as a teenager and be like, well, now it's dangerous because it's a teen party and I don't want you to go. And, it's so wrong and it's, you shouldn't be going. That would be totally out of the blue. But if I've already downplayed it a little bit, and now as teenagers, they're approaching me and asking that question, then I have a sense that it's not just about this belonging. It's not just about a tradition that we do every year, but more of this exploring and belongingness identity stage of being a teenager. So that's how I would approach them. And I would say, well, what's happening? We never celebrate so-and-so. Like why do you want to go? And, they'll probably say, well, everybody's invited and, I'm the only one who's not going to go. And I just want to check it out. It'll be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, I'd have to figure out if it was safe, because as teenagers, there could be some risks involved. I have to ask them, well, what do you think about this particular, I guess, tradition or idea? Mm-hmm. And they might say something like, well, Mom, I don't really believe in it. And, I'm just going for the fun of it. Right. So then I would probably make a deal. I would, if I made sure that it was a safe place, and if I made sure that the people that are involved in this activity are people that I trust, and people that I know, because that's regardless of any activity, whether or not it's a holiday tradition or not. That's probably what I would do for my child. I would make a deal and ask them to do some research for me. I would say, well, I want you to come back. If you want to go to this party or this event or whatever it is, I want you to come back and tell me, what are the pros and cons of celebrating this activity or holiday or whatever. Usually that elicits a groan from my kids, but I'm like, that's the deal. That's the deal. You tell me, what is this activity, what is this holiday about? And what's the debate about this holiday? Why are Muslims okay or not okay? And you make a decision. I put the onus on them, depending on how old they are. If they're older teenagers, I usually give them the decision. And I say, you make the decision. And then I would limit the amount of time that they were spending in that event. And I would say, okay, you can go for an hour, you decide, half hour, whatever it is that you're going to go. And then there's a debrief afterwards. So honestly, it's all about open communication. I have those questions, I ask them, and more times than not, when I'm having those conversations, somewhere along the research and somewhere along the conversation, a lot of times my kids are like, never mind.
It's too much work.
It's too much work. It's either too much work, or they feel like it's not worth it, or, and I give them, maybe we try to think of alternatives. Is there something else that you could do maybe with your friends, to get what it is that you're looking for, right? What it is that you're looking for. And if they don't want it, and it also depends on the child's personality. If a child's personality is like, they want it so badly, right? They want to get it out of their system, then I'm like, okay, whatever. But if I feel like, some other's personality is not that big of a deal, then I'm like, I don't think you should be going. And that usually doesn't happen, right? Again, it's very hard for me to give a very straight answer because there's so many factors. But the key is open up the conversation, and again, give them the tools to research. My kids hardly ever come to me with these kind of questions where I don't make them do the research before I say the okay.
I feel like I heard two things from you, Duaa, while you were talking, like two central things. One was, when you were talking about give them the tools for research, what you're really doing there is you're strengthening their critical thinking skills, but you're also getting them involved. So now it's about their thoughts and their opinions and what's going on in their mind as they're doing that research versus being imposed by the parent, right? So it's them in the heart of it. And that's really important because like you're saying, maybe throughout the research, they end up changing their mind anyways, because they've got some feelings that got riled up or some thoughts that came to them and decided, hey, I'm not cool with this or whatever, but it came from them, right? And you just gave them those tools. So that's one big thing I feel like I heard from you. And then the second thing I heard as you were doing this back and forth as a parent was, I heard a parent who is open and in tune with their teenager, right? And who is not approaching the situation as, instead of just saying, you might not think it's a big deal, but it's a big deal. You're just not going to do it, right? We don't do this kind of stuff. So just stay away, right? You don't have to go. It's no big deal, whatever, right? Instead of that kind of response, which is very parent-centered, really whatever history that parent has, but it's that approach of you just do it because I said so. What I heard from you instead is the opposite, is a parent who is thinking about where their child is at and in touch with that throughout the whole conversation, right? Before, what have you built already? What have you already done for them when it comes to that tradition? So that's a parent being in tune there. Then during the conversation, telling them to go research the safety. So it's a parent that's very in tune with their child and having that open conversation.
Yeah. And for the resilience piece, and this might sound mean, but I usually, if I feel like my child or a teen that a mentee, if I feel like they want to fit in all aspects of this event or party, I usually, as a part of the deal, right, is I make it a point that they make sure that there's some aspect of their Muslim identity that they're holding on to when they go to this event. So I'll say something like, well, Maghrib is going to, like, happen, at the event. Make sure, you take 5 minutes out of that time, of the party, and you're going to go pray, right? Or, something, even if it's something subtle, maybe praying is a really big thing for a teenager, but something subtle where I'm not giving them the entire ticket of just assimilating 100%. And if I was dealing with a younger child, right, I would take a completely different approach, because usually the parties for those or the events for those type of kids isn't really about the exploratory nature for those younger kids. It's just like having fun. And sometimes it's even for the parents, a whatever party, Valentine's Day party, whatever it is. It's just for the parents to have fun with all the kids or whatever. So at that point with the younger kids, I completely no, we're not going. With younger, because it's not feeding the same need for that child.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, yeah, it's a completely different need. Yeah. So for that younger child, I'm like, we're not going, but you know what? We're gonna have a Ramadan cookie decorating party, and we can invite all of our friends. And with younger kids, because it's a different need, they're like, oh yeah, Ramadan cookie decorating party, fine, it's over, and that's it.
It's so interesting to hear this from a parent's perspective, because as a kid, I would just think, what's the big deal? It's just candy. But now listening to you both, I'm learning that there's so much more to consider. So keeping in mind everything we've discussed so far about juggling identities, belonging, the fact that it's not as simple as a celebration, all of that, we also heard that both identities matter. So what are some ways and some strategies that parents can use to cultivate a sense of connection to both Muslim and American identities for their children?
I guess in the trajectory of the Muslim American experience, we have this spectrum of, no, we're not going to take anything from any other person's tradition and incorporate it into ours, and we have to make ours completely, what we're used to from an immigrant perspective back home, right? And then there's this other side of, the other part of the spectrum where we're going to adopt all of these, regular, traditions from other, mainstream ideas, and then incorporate into our Muslim traditions. There are aspects of these other traditions that are truly innovative and creative and fun that we can incorporate, right? So are there songs that, I know now people have a Ramadan playlist, right? That our kids can memorize and know for Ramadan. So they have that positive association with our traditions, right? Is there, people who are into the arts and drama, is there something that we can incorporate into our traditions that involves those costumes and pretending like you're someone that's, different than you, right? That's something that's fun and enjoyable. And can we incorporate that into our traditions? And what are the traditions of, what are the ones that we already have that we can enhance, right? So going to the masjid, sighting the moon, right? Enhancing those activities so that sighting the moon is a very Muslim specific activity, right? In the beginning of our, month, right? That's not something that you find in all of these mainstream activities, but that is a very special tradition that we can enhance for our children, and they'll remember that. And just different things like going to Taraweeh. I know that some families, they have a tradition where when they go to Taraweeh prayer, or after they, pray, they have a goodie bags for the kids, right? And I'm thinking stocking stuffers versus goodie bags, right? We have aspects of that in that we can incorporate certain aspects of the things that kids are looking for within our traditions and mix that along with the things that we already have and can enhance. And so maybe we have to up, even if you decide to have your child engage in the mainstream holidays, it's very important that our Muslim traditions are just as fun and beautiful and have those memories, those positive memories attached to it. And when I say positive memories, all five senses, right? What are the smells that are associated with, that the kids remember, that are associated with Ramadan and Eid? What are the sounds? Like until now, because I went to public school when I was younger, I memorized all the jingle, the Christmas songs.
Yep.
I can tell you every single word. I know the tunes, right? Why? Because it's all the time in your head, and you're singing it in class and listening to it over and over again. And so do we have that same stuff? Do the kids have songs? Do they have, certain smells that they associate with Ramadan, certain feelings? Do we decorate the house? And I know that in the American context, we've kind of gone all out on that, sometimes to the
too much
extreme, like to the capitalist extreme, right? But something that reminds them that our Islamic traditions are just as beautiful, or even more so. Right? I think and that goes back to the initial question that we said in the beginning is, what are your kids trying to get? Ask them that question. What do you want out of Halloween? What do you want out of Christmas? What do you want out of Easter, right? Is it finding the Easter eggs? Is it wearing costumes in Halloween? So we know by asking these open-ended questions, we're getting hints and clues as to what our kids are looking for. Mm-hmm. So costumes, can we make a Ramadan play where kids can wear costumes and dress up and be characters, like of the Sahaba, or, certain situations, and, whatever it is, is it the candy? Is it the scavenger hunt? Is there games that we can do on Eid, right? Those are the questions that we can ask and kind of explore in terms of creating our own traditions when it comes to raising our families. It's great to take the things that are good from the other tradition, but sometimes what I'm noticing is we're taking on this culture of always traditions being something where we take instead of giving, right? So that isn't a part of our Islamic tradition. Our Islamic tradition, most celebrations are a celebration of coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like, so Eid is this celebration of, we had a month of fasting, we had a month of prayer, we had a month of connecting with the Quran, right? It's very God conscious and God centered. All of our traditions, all of our celebrations have that as the core. And a very big part of most of our traditions is about giving. So in Ramadan, we're giving to the needy, we're giving to the poor, we're giving our time to others, all these things. A lot of these mainstream traditions and holidays are about taking. I mean, very capitalistic culture. So, this idea of, like, what kind of gifts am I going to get on Christmas, right? Or, how much am I going to fill my, pillowcase with candy when I go trick-or-treating? Like, it's like, I want more, I want more. And I think for many of us, we've fallen into that, I guess, hole. Like a lot of kids, when they think of Ramadan or Eid, right, they're thinking, what am I going to get for Eid? What, how many presents am I going to receive? How much money am I going to get? And that's very far from what I would say what our traditions are all about. And I think that in the process of trying to figure out what parts of the mainstream tradition we'd like to accommodate and maybe accommodate is not the right word, like to adopt or add on to our traditions, we have to remember the essence of what our traditions are about, so that we're not taking things that are kind of ruining that theme or ruining that idea. I don't know, Madiha, if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, I was just going to tell people that there's a lot of resources on this on our website. Like, there's an excellent article by you, Duaa, on how to sort of encourage family tradition. So definitely, I think folks can check those out for a lot more specific examples. And then a lot of the identity stuff we've been talking about is in the Muslim Youth, FYI's Muslim Youth Identity Bulletin as well. So like anybody that wants to follow up can definitely check those things out. The part I wanted to really add on to was that like we think as parents that like there's such a clash between like Muslim and American identities, but first like second generation kids, you know, I'm a first generation immigrant. I think you're also a first generation immigrant, right? Like, so we really, that's like very central to us as parents, but for our kids, like we're second generation, some of the, you know, us have like third generation, like it's such a natural part, and it is so fused together, like their Muslim and American components. It's not that easy for them to like separate the two. So if you keep talking about, you know, like, oh, that's American, and you use like that negative connotation, then that's what they internalize. So instead, think of how is it a fusion for your kids? You know, reframe your own mind that it is a fusion for them, and then how do you build it up so that when they think American, they're not thinking of this like negative part of them. It's just a natural part of who they are. And so some of it, for just as an example, it's something I learned even just being here for so many years, is that like the simple fact that when you think of American, you think of, you know, as like, you know, it was the immigrant Muslims that brought Islam to America. And that's actually not even true, right? Islam was here for centuries. And then the role that the Black Muslims played in Islam in America makes you be like, what do you mean Islam and, you know, being Muslim and being American and the immigrant experience? It was already here. We're already part of this landscape, and we already had a role here. So this whole like narrative that we often try to, you know, share with our kids of like, you belong here, and you know what we hear from other people of like, you're a part of the American culture, and you're, you know, we are welcoming to you. What we, right? Muslims were here, so what we. So I think as parents, we have to reshift that a little bit. And that's the way that you can really strengthen their sort of identity that they're already doing internally when it comes to like what we call American, because what is that even? Is helping them see that it is so fused. And that so many things that we think are American values, you know, the democratic process or civic engagement, like those things are already embedded in our religion as well, and in our Islamic traditions. And so helping them see like that overlap, I think really helps them see that this is like a fused process, and it's not, there's no clash, right? And then you do help them navigate with the parts that do clash, because of course there are values, right, that don't, you know, aren't in line with like our religious or cultural values. And so that's where that like those open conversations matter, and that foundation that you've built for them matters.
Thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts with us all. I've learned so much from this conversation. As Dr. Madiha mentioned, we have more resources on holidays and traditions and identity and belonging. So click the links wherever you are listening to this conversation for a quick access to those resources. You can also go to thefyi.org for more of our work. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to let us know. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for listening.